Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Gregory Brew, senior analyst with Eurasia Group. Gregory, thanks so much for coming on once again.
Thanks for having me back, Brittany.
The world is in a precarious position right about now. Ever since 2 weeks ago, when a top leader of Hamas was killed, the world has been bracing for a response from Iran. We're still waiting for that response. It has not happened yet. So can you talk about the time that we're in right now?
Certainly. I think, it's important to acknowledge at the outset that things haven't changed. It has been 2 weeks since Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran. The Iranians have treated this as a provocation. They have promised retribution, retaliation. It's very likely that if they do retaliate, it will come in the form of another direct attack against Israel, as we saw in April. Iranian leaders, including Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, have continually said that they will retaliate. Both the United States and Israel have also said that an attack could be coming. They don't really know when it will come. The details are still unknown. The Iranians have not given any signposting or telegraphing indicating when they'll attack or what form the attack will take. So right now, I think it's important to acknowledge that we are still waiting to see how Iran responds, even though it's been a few weeks.
And there was reporting saying that the attack was imminent. It was 24 to 48 hours a few days ago. That time has come and gone. So why the delay? What does this delay specifically signal to you?
Well, I think it signals a few things. First, I don't think we can discount the fact that the Iranians are choosing to delay, that perhaps they're using the delay as a little bit of psychological warfare. They did something very similar in April. They used the delay to expand on the psychological aspect of their attack, threatening their attack. Iranian propaganda has been going 24/7, emphasizing how powerful the retaliation will be. So keeping everybody in suspense could be an element of the retaliation. They may be choosing to wait a few weeks before delivering their blow. On the other hand, there is some evidence to suggest that the Iranians are hesitating. There could be internal discussions going on inside Tehran. We don't know the details about those discussions because the process is very opaque. But the Iranians may be reconsidering whether a direct, large-scale assault against Israel is acceptable given the immense escalatory risks. Israel seems poised to deliver a retaliation. The United States has been warning against retaliating. The U.S. has also moved a lot of military assets into the region. And this could be giving Iran pause and perhaps giving it a chance to recalibrate its intended retaliation so as to avoid escalation.
I am curious because since Iran has promised a retaliation, they are waiting. It could either be a hesitation or strategic patience, as you said. Is there any way that Iran can not retaliate, not respond, and still appear, or what they appear to be, on the offense?
You've hit the nail on the head. Iran is in a strategic dilemma, right? After April, they have set the bar higher for themselves as to what they need to do to retaliate against a big Israeli provocation. The Haniyeh assassination is certainly a provocation. Iran has to respond, but it's dangerous and difficult to do so without inviting further escalation. So it's possible that the Iranians could be looking for an off-ramp, some way for them to de-escalate, maybe draw their response down to something that's less escalatory. The current ceasefire discussions going on in Doha may offer Iran an off-ramp. If a ceasefire deal comes together, I say if, it's a big if, but if a deal does come together, it's possible that the Iranians would gesture to it, use it as a way to declare victory, as a way to de-escalate and reduce the pressure on themselves to retaliate. But I say if there's no ceasefire deal, if negotiations don't produce a deal, then the Iranians will still feel pressure to retaliate.
I mean, that is a huge if, and someone missing from the table are Hamas leaders and Hamas itself. Ceasefire talks right now are happening in Doha. Israel's there along with the United States and others. Hamas is not. I mean, how do you think those are going if a big factor of these talks is missing?
Well, both the United States and other actors involved in the negotiations, Qatar and Egypt, have all acknowledged that they didn't really expect Hamas to participate in the talks. And there's one big reason for that, and the reason is Yahya Sinwar. Sinwar, of course, was the military commander who organized the October 7th attack on Israel. He has been leading Hamas, the military side, in Gaza since the start of this war. And with Haniyeh's assassination, Sinwar has now risen to the top and is also serving as the group's political chief. So nobody really had any expectation that Sinwar would leave Gaza and participate in these negotiations. There is, however, an expectation that whatever the negotiations produce, if it's a new proposal, if it's a new deal, it will be communicated to Hamas via Qatar and Egypt, and Hamas will likely take some time to consider whatever the negotiations produce. So the fact that Hamas is not involved isn't really a surprise. It's also important to acknowledge that the United States has been trying to set expectations. U.S. spokespeople have been specific when they say these negotiations are restarting today. We don't expect them to produce a deal, but we do hope for progress on negotiations. And I think Iran will see any kind of progress as an excuse to continue to delay its retaliation. The decision makers in Tehran don't want to take any action that could potentially undermine a ceasefire deal.
How big of a bargaining chip would you say this looming Iranian attack is when it comes to the ceasefire talks?
Well, I think, saying that it's a bargaining chip is an interesting way to look at it. I do think the United States is very conscious of the escalatory risk, very conscious of the regional crisis, and is doing what it can to prevent it. At the same time, the pressure being created from the Iranian threat is giving the United States an additional tool, an additional source of leverage to go to Israel, to go to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and say, you need to accept a deal, we need to make a deal, we need to reach a ceasefire in Gaza, this is our last chance to do it, and the alternative could be regional escalation, could be war that would damage everyone involved. So on the one hand, this is a crisis. The United States is doing everything that it can to deter Iran. At the same time, the Iranian threat could be adding the U.S. an additional source of leverage that could maybe give it what it needs to produce a deal in Doha.
You and I talked at the beginning of last week, and in that conversation, you said that Netanyahu's government was in a particularly difficult position. Has that position gotten more difficult over the past week and a half?
Well, I think Netanyahu's position has maybe come under additional pressure. There's been some comments from other officials in the government, including his chief negotiators who are now currently in Doha, suggesting that pressure is building around the prime minister to yield to the pressures and agree to a deal. One of the major obstacles in reaching a deal over the last several weeks have been new demands that Netanyahu himself has brought into the negotiating table. He's trying to push for tougher conditions regarding Hamas, regarding the Gaza border with Egypt, the Philadelphia corridor. He is pushing for much tougher restrictions on the movement of civilians inside Gaza. And these conditions, these new demands, are preventing a deal from coming together. Some comments from his negotiators suggest that there are pressures building inside the government to try to get the prime minister to agree to a deal. Whether or not those pressures produce any kind of meaningful change in his position remains to be seen. But his position and the condition of the Israeli government continues to be a precarious one.
You're saying that Iran could be looking for an off-ramp here. The United States has said time and time again they don't want to see escalation in the region. So how valid do you think the claims are, or the fears rather, of a wider Middle East regional war?
I think they're very valid, Brittany. I think the risks are very high. Certainly nobody wants a war, but miscalculation presents a constant fear of escalation. And given Iran's position, given the reasons I've laid out for why they may feel compelled to retaliate, even with the escalatory risks, I mean, everyone's in a very precarious position right now. The United States doesn't want to get dragged into a war, but if Israel gets attacked directly, as it did in April, the U.S. will be obliged to defend Israel. If Israel then chooses to retaliate against Iran after some kind of direct attack, the United States will also feel compelled to provide a degree of support. So there is, and then of course Hezbollah, Iran's ally in Lebanon, could very well be involved, and that could trigger a war on Israel's northern border. So even if no specific actor intends to start a conflict, there's a very pronounced risk that a conflict could break out and escalate through miscalculation or through actors being compelled to undertake action that they normally wouldn't choose to do.
It's certainly a developing situation, but what specifically are you looking out for next? And when it comes to these negotiations, what rhetoric coming out of them could you hear that would make you believe that escalations will tamp down?
Well, I think we should temper our expectations for today and for tomorrow. From what I've seen, there are Israeli negotiators who are planning on staying in Doha into tomorrow, into Friday. That would suggest the negotiations are making some kind of progress. I would expect very limited progress. I would expect these discussions to produce some kind of new proposal, which the United States can then send to Hamas. Hamas will then probably take several days to consider those proposals before issuing a response. So progress at this point could be incremental, but even incremental process suggests the possibility of de-escalation and will likely continue to allow Iran to delay its response against Israel. If there's a sign that talks have failed, if there is clear rhetoric from Israel or Hamas that they don't see any deal coming out of these negotiations, then the escalatory risk could very well increase. And at that point, I would look very closely at what the United States is doing. If the U.S. starts to reposition its assets, if President Biden takes a posture that suggests a security crisis might be breaking out, if the Israeli leadership go on higher alert, if they start indicating to their civilian population that an attack could be forthcoming, then I would be more concerned, and I would expect the Iranian retaliation to be more likely and more imminent.
There's certainly a lot to look out for, and as the situation in the Middle East continues to develop, Gregory, I hope you come back on and join me again. Thank you so much for your expertise and breaking this down for me and the viewers.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.